From Vermont Public, this is The Frequency. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. It's Friday, August 1st, and here are today's headlines. State officials expect overall revenues in Vermont will grow just over 1% in the new fiscal year, but they warn economic uncertainty at the national level could cause that to change dramatically. Tom Cavett is the chief economist for the legislature. He told members of Vermont's emergency board yesterday the possibility of new Canadian tariffs could quickly hurt state revenues.
And that's the most important one for us by far. We may need to revisit some of the stuff, hopefully not before January, but maybe. And if that happens, okay.
Other state economists note a federal crackdown on immigrants without legal status could harm Vermont's agriculture, construction, and healthcare industries. Health insurance companies that offer plans on the state marketplace are proposing more modest rate hikes after 3 years of double-digit increases. But some say next year's plans on Vermont Health Connect will still be unaffordable. The insurer MVP Healthcare wants to raise rates by about 3% for both individuals and small businesses. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Vermont is asking for larger increases, about 15% for individuals and 7% for small businesses. Several people urged state regulators to reject the proposals during a public hearing last week, including Grace Powers. She's 27 years old and says plans will be too expensive next year.
Without insurance, I won't be able to access primary and preventative care. My only access to health care will be going to the ER once my health deteriorates enough to be treated there.
The board will issue a decision on whether to approve the proposed rates by mid-August. Federal subsidies that reduced premium costs for some people are also set to expire this year. Vermont Attorney General Charity Clark has announced a settlement with the Saint Albans Creamery and Dairy Farmers of America. The lawsuit accused the creamery of violating its federal wastewater permit on several occasions between 2021 and 2024. It argued the creamery sent untreated milk and cream to the municipal wastewater plant. State regulators say this overwhelmed the facility and polluted a nearby tributary of Lake Champlain. Under the settlement, the creamery will pay more than $200,000 in fines, and it will have to upgrade its on-site wastewater system. In a statement, the creamery said it has already started that process. And over the next few days, government airplanes and helicopters will drop more than 500,000 baits across northern Vermont, intended for raccoons and other wildlife. The tiny baits smell like caramel, and they contain liquid rabies vaccine. This method has been used for years to curb the deadly disease, but recent outbreaks have led to more frequent vaccine drops in the state. Dr. Natalie Quitt is a veterinarian with the Department of Health. She spoke with Vermont Public earlier this year and calls rabies a zombie virus.
Because it makes a host, it depends on the species, but it could make them act strange and more reactive to movement or sounds and makes them aggressive. And then it bite another animal and then it goes on.
More than 70 animals have tested positive for rabies in Vermont and southern Quebec this year. Vaccine drops are known to help slow the spread, but it often takes several years to immunize enough animals to be effective. Coming up, each year on a single January evening in Vermont, information is gathered to try and determine the number of people experiencing homelessness. Our housing and infrastructure reporter Carly Berlin has the latest on this year's point-in-time count. That's after this. The point-in-time count is an annual tally of everyone experiencing homelessness in Vermont on a single night each January. Now, the data from the latest count is in, and it shows that there were nearly 3,400 unhoused Vermonters this past winter. Vermont Public's housing and infrastructure reporter Carly Berlin broke down the numbers with host Mary Engish.
How does this latest count compare to the last few years?
This is really a plateau from the last time this count took place in January of 2024. The numbers dipped down just slightly, 2%, which is the first downward trend we've seen as part of these annual counts since before the pandemic, when homelessness numbers skyrocketed. But the homelessness advocates who put the count together say it's not time to celebrate yet. Here's Taylor Tebow with the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance at a press conference on Wednesday.
While this year's numbers are sobering, they have remained relatively stable compared to last year. But stability doesn't mean that the crisis is easing.
Advocates say that's especially true as the share of unhoused people who are unsheltered, that is, sleeping in a vehicle or on the street or in the woods, has spiked.
And Carly, what does the data show about the number of people in that category who are actually living outside?
It shows that there was a nearly 63% jump in people who were unsheltered between January of 2024 and January of this year, from 166 people to 270. And advocates say that is likely a significant undercount. That's partly because it's always harder to find and count people who are living outdoors, especially in a rural place like Vermont.
Yeah.
But there's also a more specific reason. On the night of the count this past January, the city of Burlington was operating an emergency winter weather shelter during a particularly cold spell. And so they counted more than 70 people staying there as having a place to sleep indoors, even though the shelter was only running for a couple of nights. Advocates say this big rise in unhoused people who lack stable shelter in the middle of winter is a direct result of cuts by state leaders to the motel voucher program in recent years.
You had mentioned that some of the limitations to this data, like the fact that it's hard to count people. You also reported in your story these advocates say they now have a better, more up-to-date source of information on how many people are unhoused. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. So service providers all across the state, they use a uniform system to streamline resources for unhoused people. It's called coordinated entry. And this year, for the first time, advocates release data from that system as part of this annual report. And that data shows the scale of the problem is even larger than previously understood. According to the report, as of June, there were over 4,500 unhoused Vermonters. And of those, over 1,000 were kids under 18.
That number is just staggering. What do the advocates have to say about how we fix this problem?
First, they say there's a huge mismatch between the need in the state and the infrastructure to support it. There are thousands of unhoused people, but only hundreds of shelter beds. And the motel voucher program, which is meant to be this backup for when shelters are full, is getting wound down. The advocates argue that the solution here is spending more money. They say we as a state need to invest more in affordable housing, in shelters, and in services. Here's Kim Ansberger, the director of the shelter Lamoille Community House, at that Wednesday press conference.
Every year we fail to invest meaningfully in our community. This crisis gets worse. We cannot keep delaying this investment.
The question will be whether there's a political will for the state to spend more than it already is to curb homelessness.
That was Report for America Corps member Carly Berlin speaking with host Mary Engish about this year's point-in-time count. Carly covers housing and infrastructure for VT Digger and Vermont Public. And this note before we sign off for today's episode: you would normally hear the weekly sports report at this point on a Frequency Friday, but this week we're going to postpone our news from the world of sports until Monday's episode. That's so we can analyze and sum up all the action that occurred before the end of the Major League Baseball trading deadline, which was still in play at the time we taped today's podcast. Thanks for your patience, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss as teams try to shore up their squads for the regular season home stretch. And thanks for listening to The Frequency today. We had additional reporting from Bob Kinzel, Lexi Krupp, and Abigail Giles. Today's episode was edited by Stephanie Colombini, and our music is by Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Mitch Wertlieb. Talk to you Monday.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.